The developers of the upcoming game, Total War Pharaoh, were kind enough to sit down and do an interview about their work, but even though they had a camera in the room, I was told we couldn't use the footage, so as usual, we'll have to get creative. Who dares stand before the morning and evening star, the second pharaoh of the 20th dynasty of Kamut?
My name is Cody, and I am the game director of Total War Pharaoh. I've been with the project since its inception, and I'm making sure that it releases on time and in the best shape possible.
I am Božidar Stajkov, and I am a battle designer on Total War Pharaoh, and one of my responsibilities, mainly my responsibilities, are to make battles look cool and be cool.
And also fun.
Yeah.
Pharaoh knows your names. You were the architects of Troy. But Pharaoh is greater than Priam.
Troy was a very valuable experience to us because we were able to take account into a lot of user feedback that we tried to address as much as possible for Pharaoh. Like, for example, one of the major things that we did was the inclusion of match combat animations for all of the units, and not only the generals. This was quite an impactful decision that was the main ingredient of the whole slowing down of battles, because match combat animations require the battles to take a bit more time. And this informed the later decision of just going through this representation of a classic Total War feel. Like, we want the game to feel like some of the older titles in regards to battles in particular. We wanted to reduce the amount of micromanagement, not force the player to precisely time an ability. Instead, allow the player to take a look at the battlefield, take into account the army compositions and the terrain, like its elevation, but also the terrain type itself, then plan and execute a maneuver. And I'm pretty happy that in Pharaoh right now there are battles that can be decided in a single maneuver, which is what happened in older Total War titles. In addition to that, based on feedback from Troy and from other places, we removed the pocket ladders and replaced them with some lightly armored siege towers, which improves the overall immersion and also makes the battles on the campaign map last a bit longer, because you need to construct them before battle. You can't just take settlement straight away. There is another piece of feedback that is related to the campaign map. We increased the distances between the different settlements, because to Troy we got reports of too many settlement battles. It was often mentioned, and this is one of the ways that we tried to reduce their frequency, and we want to provide the space required for land battles to take place.
Yeah, and another thing that we took from as like a lesson from Troy was that people really liked more weird maps, not just flat fields, and more terrain on maps. So we're continuing this trend of having more wild maps as opposed to flat fields.
Pharaoh cares not for the whims of Chattel and the paltry works of Agamemnon. What of the works of Pharaoh?
Yes, the Mycenae map in Troy was really well made to be a replica of the real Mycenae. For Pharaoh, we have looked into some of our unique settlements to have them as close to the original as possible. Although the one I have in thought right now, and you've even played it, is Memphis. The only addition that we did add is walls, because that settlement did not have walls at the time. But due to gameplay reasons, we added them. Although we did look at excavations, from different time periods, and we had to match our time period, which is the Late Bronze Age, and how it might have looked. One of the greatest cities that the Egyptian Empire has filled is Pi-Ramses, which was the capital during Ramses II's time. We also have Thebes, which is also an important city in Egyptian society. And in the other end of the world, we have in Anatolia, Hattusha, which is the capital of the Hittite Empire.
The triumphs of Pharaoh's ancestors line the palace walls. Yet for your childish game, even you must acknowledge that Ramses, third son of Ra, is the greatest among them.
Well, there are a number of reasons, and I will give them in no particular order. The late Bronze Age was the time of the New Kingdom period, and in this time, Egypt was a vast empire that aggressively expanded, and I was actually kind of surprised when I did the initial research because when I was doing that for the first time, I was not very much aware of Egypt, apart from the pyramids, of course. But at this point, they were no longer these peace-loving builders that live around the Nile. No, they extended far away from the Nile, and their influence extended as far as Mesopotamia and further north along the eastern Mediterranean coast. We want to represent such an empire in our game. It's a very Total War fitting. Additionally, in this time period, there are other empires like the Hittite Empire, which is also part of the game, and both Egypt and the Hittite Empire have a serious internal problem. Like there are civil wars in both of the places. In Egypt, it's particularly noticeable because it's one of the few periods where you get to see a couple of civil wars in a very short amount of time. Like there are several pharaohs after Merneptah that swiftly changed position. It's not entirely certain what happened back then. Like there is a lot of blanks, a lot of missing information, but it made sense for us that it will make a great Total War setting, an arena. And finally, it is the collapse of the Bronze Age. It's we're representing a world that is on the cusp of collapse. It's almost breaking apart. Like it has been stable for quite a while because in the late Bronze Age, the different political entities, the different empires and great civilizations have established a sort of balance where there were no longer any major wars, some proxy wars like between client states. There was, complex diplomatic relations and trade happening. It was all very stable. They had even a so-called club of the great powers like the Pharaoh and the Hittite Emperor and some other civilizations. And it all fell into dust. Like it all got destroyed. And we're not certain how. There were a number of factors like the civil wars that I already mentioned, some external invaders represented as the sea peoples in the game, some disasters also happening. But at the end, most of the civilizations were gone. It took a couple of decades, like several. And after that, there was a dark age that lasted for a couple of centuries. And Egypt survived because of Ramses III, that you already saw in the battles, because he managed to keep Egypt together in their darkest hour. And this is what we want to have the player experience in the game, like survive the collapse or go with the collapse or just, yeah.
Pharaoh did not become great by butchering slaves and barbarians. Nature itself was brought to heel by the living God.
Correct. There are a number of disasters that are taking place during the playthrough, and this will, in your campaign, they will introduce random threats in situations that you have to try and deal with.
How did your feeble minds obtain such wisdoms?
When I was doing the research for the Hittite Empire, one that stood out was Warriors of Anatolia, which has nothing to do with warriors. It has to, it's basically what the laws and the day-to-day life of a Hittite citizen might have been. Like we have some surviving laws from tablets, and what these laws might entice on how the day-to-day life basically goes. So that's a pretty good one. I don't know how accurate it is, but it is really interesting.
Yeah. I would point out a few things. Like for me personally, a lot of information and inspiration I got from a book called Red Land, Black Land, which is by Barbara Mertz, who is a renowned Egyptologist. And also there was another which is like a popular history, but it's not exactly history, but again, it gets you into the atmosphere of ancient Egypt. And I believe it was called something along the lines of 24 hours in ancient Egypt, where you get to read 24 stories, and each describe the hour of the pharaoh, of a priest, of a dancer, of a tomb robber, and it was pretty amazing. Additionally, two more. One of them is a novel called Pharaoh by Boleslav Prus. It was written. He's a Polish author, and it was written somewhere in late 19th century or the 20th century, and it's fascinating because at that point Egyptology was not as developed as it currently is, but the whole society and the relations between the characters and the way the pharaoh is treated, for example, is very representative of what it might have been back then. It's a great book because it not only describes the life in ancient Egypt, but also talks about the nature of the state as well. And finally, the ultimately greatest source about Bronze Age stuff is the Amarna letters, which are, you know about those, I presume, which are diplomatic correspondence, remnants of it, that describe various things that are happening in the Bronze Age world. It's slightly before the Bronze Age collapse, but it describes a world that is already kind of in crisis, because usually when someone is writing a letter to the pharaoh, they ask for help, they ask for assistance, for chariots, for archers, or they ask why the pharaoh has sent them gold that is apparently fake. So it paints a very interesting picture of the world.
And they call him brother with the Hittites when they're doing...
Exactly, because they are of the same diplomatic level. Another discovery of mine during the development of Pharaoh was an opera by Philip Glass called Akhenaten. It's about the pharaoh Akhenaten, the father of Tutankhamun, who is a heretic, and he introduced monotheism in Egyptian religion. And the opera is quite gripping and immersive. And as part of the libretto, you can hear some of the Amarna letters, which is
in Egyptian?
No,
in Coptic.
No, in English. You have to understand what you're listening to. But there are also some songs in Egyptian.
Even a single hair from Pharaoh's beard is divine. What smallest detail of our great beauty did you capture?
That's an amazing question, by the way.
Yes, it is. Cody, what have you done?
I think that one of the things that I like the most, it's a tiny little detail. I have not put it personally in the game because I'm not putting personally anything in the game, but we have these very flavorful descriptions of the different seasons in the campaign map. You can see a little bar with all of the seasons, and on hover there is the description of the effects and also a bit of a flavor text. I'm a huge fan of flavor text that for the different seasons describes the different forms of Ra, and it's just a bit of brilliant detail that I love. I love such thing in any Total War title.
If we're talking flavor texts, mine would be the sand flavor text in the battle. It's coarse and it's rough and it's irritating.
Yeah.
It just gets everywhere, you know.
Pharaoh was not amused, yet despite your insolence, you capture the might of Ahmet's armies as they push forward and fall back at a single command. What secret did Ptah whisper in your ears for you to succeed where so many others have failed?
It's magic.
Is it now? I thought it was technology.
Oh yes, it was. Are they the same thing?
Sorry?
For me, they are the same thing. Technology and magic.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, it was done by code.
We wanted to recreate the feeling of a classic Total War title, where, for example, Rome 1, where units could push each other, like the heavy unit would push their enemy backwards. And we wanted to give this to the players, but give them some more agency so that they could decide when exactly they would command their units to push, and perhaps they would command their units to step back and, fall back so that the enemy comes after them and hopefully opens their flanks.
So what we wanted to do with unit stances was to, as Todor said, give the player more agency, but also give more control in the melee of the battle. To have your unit just not be just a right click and leave it until the fight is over, but for it to be okay. So what can I do with this unit? Can I push through the other guys in front of me? Do I have enough mass? Are they heavy? Am I light? So all of these questions come into the equation where when you are using those different stances. Yeah, it all came from, we want more agency in the melee. We want to have the ability to create space on the battlefield. So as Toro mentioned, like falling back from a choke point, or even pushing them from a choke point, it frees up space on the map, and you can do all sorts of tactics with these unit stances. And mass plays a huge role in this, and unit weight. So you cannot have your light units push through guys that have like 30 pounds of armor on them. I don't know, 30 pounds a lot? So 80 pounds, like you won't have your guys dressed in cloth armor and some leather straps to protect them be able to push to somebody that's deeply in their place, like so determined to not move. But you could have guys that have 80 pounds of armor on them push through lighter dudes, like I see a guy that's with light armor defending that choke point. I have heavy armored guys. I can just go through them.
The enemies of Pharaoh hide in their suits of bronze, yet the numbers of Pharaoh's armies are endless. Does this weight of numbers not count greater than that of our brothers the Hatti?
So it would take into account, but due to how we have balanced out mass, it will not be a huge difference. If we have 60 heavy units defending against 120 light units, it would budge them a bit, but it would not be a huge difference.
Their bronze is as weak as their spirits. Neither will save them from the wheels of our chariots, as both are crushed beneath Pharaoh's will.
As we just said, bronze armor is not the best armor, not the best material to make armor out of, and it is fragile. And we want to get that into the game. And how do we do it? We did armor degradation, which is also a balancing tool for us to have these heavy armored guys in the north from Anatolia versus the predominantly light Egyptians. How do we balance this out? It just came naturally. It's you have your armor degradation, and we also expanded, by the way, on weapons. Some weapons deal more damage to armor. Let's say clubs. Clubs will do more damage to armor. Armor has basically its own health, and all sorts of armor have their own health, but it's mostly seen in heavy armor. And this is an incentive for players to actually have some of their front line in reserves as well. So you're technically quote unquote depleting your heavy units at first, and then you put up a second line of units. It's one of those incentives. Another thing that with the multiple victory points system that we did was to add a blacksmith, which whoever controls that and has units in its vicinity will have their armor slowly repaired.
Truly, bronze must be cast into the fire to be reforged anew. But what of wildfire, the untamed flame?
So we want to give another tactical element to the users to utilize. So due to the restrictions that we have during the Bronze Age, we thought of something interesting, what would be interesting for the players to play with. And playing with fire rolls off the tongue so easily. So what we did was we made new tech for fire, and now fire can spread. It can spread and deal damage to units as well, as you have seen. It can spread to forests, it can spread to grass, it can spread to siege equipment and deal damage to siege equipment and destroy it. It can also spread in cities and from building to building. As an offensive tool, as you said, the player can use it basically to destroy forests, which removes their forest effect. So basically, you just cannot hide anymore in those forests. Same goes with tall grass. Light units can usually hide in tall grass. If you burn it down, no tall grass, no hiding. To get back to the offensive tool thing, when you're sieging settlement, you can, or like, it doesn't matter if it's a major settlement or a minor settlement, you can set fire to the buildings. What this will do is cause penalties for the defender, The more you burn down the city, the more penalty the defender gets. But the caveat is, after you capture that city, you have to pay for that. So for defensive tool, you can once again burn down forests to have as less of a chance of somebody ambushing you in battle. And of course, you can burn down siege equipment, which is a big plus now that we've removed pocket ladders.
The tale of the pathetic war between the Troya and Achaeans required monsters and fictional gods. But does Ramses' story need such childish embellishments?
For Troy, we had the truth behind the myth approach, which was based on the fact that we had these sources that are quite mythological and legendary, Iliad and all the rest of the epic cycle. And we wanted to create this sort of similar mixture of mythological and real, divine and mundane. But in the case of Pharaoh, we have no such sources. We have some historical data, some archaeological findings, and it's just a lot of filling in the blanks. But this in turn contributed a lot to the sandbox nature of the game, of the campaign, because we're not telling a particular story, we're telling the story of the player that's in the late Bronze Age as it's about to collapse.
You've given us much to think on, but your answers please Pharaoh. You may go with the blessings of Ra. Return when you have campaign footage and a let's play, so that we may judge if your words were truthful or not.
By the way, just before you go, I have a little personal thing to tell you.
Yes.
A few years ago, during the Rise of the Republic development, I was the design lead back then, and it was the first project that I was the design lead. And towards the end of development of a project, it's all quite, chaotic. Like there are a lot of fires to put out, a lot of pressure, it's natural. But I remember that you created a video, I got it open over here right now. It's called Rise of the Republic New Campaign Reveal for Total War Rome 2. I have to say this was a major inspiration for me, because we're making a game and all of a sudden we saw how it looks to other people. It was just amazing.
Thank you again to the developers of Total War Pharaoh for sitting down and speaking with me, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with them. Thanks for watching. Who dares stand before the morning and evening star, the second Pharaoh of the 20th dynasty of Cairo?